thanks to everyone for jumping on, and welcome to our Enterprise Ireland UK webinar, UKCA Marking, What You Need to Do as an Irish Engineering Company. My name is Kevin Fennelly. I'm the Market Advisor for Engineering and Agriculture based here in our London office. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the new product marking here in the UK, UKCA, how it will affect you as an Irish company operating in the market, and the steps you need to take to be compliant ahead of our 1st of January 2023 deadline. I'm delighted to be joined today by Mike Whiting, Certification and Compliance Engineer, Newmac Limited. How are you today, Mike?
Very well, thank you, Kevin.
Great stuff. Mike and his colleagues at Newmac support companies here in the UK and beyond on their compliance requirements, and he has worked with a number of Irish companies to date on their UKCA compliance, and we're delighted to have him on today's webinar. Before I hand you over to Mike, a couple of housekeeping pieces from our side. Firstly, a brief introduction to our work here in Enterprise Ireland UK. As many of you will know, we are the Irish Development Agency for Trade and Innovation, supporting over 5,000 companies to grow and scale in global markets. This is done through our head office in Dublin and our 40+ offices around the world. In the UK, we have offices here in London and in Manchester, where our sector specialists support Irish companies with market intelligence and knowledge, and work with UK companies to help them source their next innovation coming out of Ireland. A quick word on the platform we're using today, which is Zoom. Your mics and video should be muted at this point. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the questions tab on the toolbar towards the bottom of your screen, which you will see on our slides there. We've allotted plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and we would welcome any questions you may have throughout today's presentation. And we'd like to thank the many of you who've sent in questions in advance. Much appreciated, and we hope to get to as many as we can at the end of today. Any questions that we cannot get to in today's webinar, we will be sure to follow up an email, and feel free to get in touch following today's webinar if you have any questions popping up. Finally, a final piece from my side, a recording of today's webinar will be available to attendees, and along with the slides Mike has kindly provided for us today. And I think that's it from my side. Without any further ado, I'll now hand you over to Mike Whiting, Certification and Compliance Engineer, Newmac Limited. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for dialing in today. I'm going to ask Kevin if he can kindly move us on to our first slide, please. I appreciate that today we're here to cover the UKCA marking, but it's opportune that we first of all understand the background to the legislative requirement and the impacts of the EU and where things actually originated from. A lot of discussion, I appreciate, out there in the marketplace. People are saying, well, UKCA, what's the difference between CE, etc. So let's go through the CE platform and understand a bit more. CE was set up as a method for establishing safety compliance. So effectively, us as consumers could go in and buy products, look at a range of products, not performance related, but safety related. All products would be safe to a certain consistent level of standard. Some examples here of EU directives which you may be familiar with. EU Machinery Directive 2006/42/EC, electrocompatibility EMC, which covers a range of products, high voltage, low voltage, equipment such as we use today, laptops, etc. Eco-design, energy-related product directives, which are obviously very much in the news. As a result of Brexit, the UK needed to put in place its own framework to establish safe marketing of products across the UK. So if we go on to our next slide, please, Kevin. Thank you. Again, one of the questions or whatever, when we're looking at decision making, who, what, where, when, whom, why UKCA? The UK drafted what it was called the Product Safety and Metrology, etc. Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2019. Again, this is political speak in a way that it was an umbrella type of umbrella legislation under which everything else could be derived, and effectively forming a framework for an orderly exit from the EU. The UKCA mark was derived from this legislation. The UK needed to put in place its own form of compliance that was different to everything else, and the EU or the CE mark is actually EU property. So it's controlled by EU legislation. And We'll come on to a bit more about, you know, the interaction of UK and CA and CE as we go through these slides here. One important factor to mention, and one of the headline facts to mention from today, which you may or may not be aware of, is UK, for the UKCA mark, for the definition of the UKCA mark, is England, Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland is remaining under EU accreditation with CE approval, and again, we're not covering the politicians' areas today, but you're familiar with the Northern Ireland Free Trade Agreement and the fact that the border was placed into the Irish Sea. So that's again one of the fundamental points that we need to keep in mind. If you could take us on to our next slide, please, Kevin. So again, we're just keeping that theme of where are we with CE, and to establish or understand a little bit more about UKCA, we need to understand the CE compliance process. So when we talk about CE, what do we actually mean? Well, it's a defined approach to establishing the safety of machines, products, which are placed onto the market by manufacturers or distributors. And one of the key things about CE compliance is assessing it across its intended life cycle. Many discussions with manufacturers when we've got new machines, but we've got to remember new machines get used. Some of them get used a lot harder than others, etc. And we're envisaging right across the maintenance, inspection and repair, right actually through to recycling, etc. It's applying a legislative guidance in the form of EU directives, and then what we call these EU Harmonised Standards, which again we'll come on to in a moment. So all the time we're following a framework of compliance to get us to the end result. Sometimes that's not quite clearly defined at the beginning, because when with the manufacturers that we've got on the call today, such a wide range of products, there isn't a defined compliance route for every single different product. So sometimes we have to pick our way through. Sometimes it's a combination of using various assessment bodies, etc. And obviously a range of testing, etc. that is required. One of the other key points about any compliance, whether it's UKCA or CE, is that there are certain areas which self-assessment doesn't cover. So if we were sat there today, and I don't know if we have got any type approval bodies on the call here, but if we were sat here today as manufacturers and say we want to go and design the machine, etc., we've designed it, but there could be some areas under type approval which we couldn't cover. And there are go-to websites, go-to bodies which we can get this information from to establish these type of requirements. So examples under the machinery directive would be things like ROPS and FOPS, rollover protection systems, falling object protection, certain sawing equipment which is used, which is got hazardous elements, etc. And those we would have to go to this body that's got a defined number and approved by government. It is interesting when having a quick chat with Kevin beforehand, just to add a bit of lightheartedness, when you look under Nando, under Google, the first thing, it's the home of peri peri chicken, for those of you familiar with the restaurant. But it's not the sit down restaurant. It's this new approach, notified and designating organizations. And they will have defined numbers that will give us the confirmation that they can undertake that testing there. So we're looking at this combination of self-assessment and type approval. If we could go on to the next slide, please, Kevin. So the CE compliance, we're going through this process. We've established that we've got some EU directives to apply. And here's an example which could apply to a range of machinery. First of all, an EU harmonised standard. What does an EU harmonised standard mean? It's a presumption of conformity, and again, this is the legal type of text, which means that in a court of law, it's referred to as a document which has been put together by a panel of experts operating within the EU or across the globe, possibly. It could be ISO standards. And they've used the relevant information to put that standard together. It's then been verified. And an example here on the right is the BSE and ISO 14120, a classic go-to standard for guarding, which gives us a practical application of guarding for a range of things there, and the designer could have fixed, movable, distance, self-locking interlock guards, and all of a sudden, when we talk about those range of guards, we can cover a multitude of machines. Also, the other advantage with harmonised standards is they give us links to other standards. So EN ISO 12100 is the baseline risk assessment standard that would cover any range of machinery and possibly other products that aren't quite machinery, because it's giving us a risk assessment template. EN ISO 13855 approach speeds of parts of the body, EN ISO 14119 interlock guarding. And therefore this standard takes us through that whole process right to the point of verification of the guard and you know, when it's encompassed into the actual product or machine. So we've got an example there of a snapshot example of taking us through CE through to the point of placing the product on the market. So hopefully, if we could take us on to our next slide, please, Kevin. Hopefully that's given us a common understanding of CE and what's required and the process that companies are going through. So moving on to UKCA. Well, let's just think back to the Brexit type process and where we are. The UK government used various phrases during the Brexit negotiations about what it was going to do with regards to EU legislation and how it was going to apply it. And it wanted to replicate as much as possible existing laws so that there was an orderly transition. And here's just some snapshot examples here of some comparisons between the EU and the UK. And terminology. So this is terminology which will become commonplace within UKCA marking, and there are references that are available on the UK government website to get this information. So as an example, the EU referred to the EU Machinery Directive 2006/42 EC. The equivalent UK statutory instrument is what's called the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008. And that the content of that regulation there is the same as the EU Machinery Directive 2006/42 EC. So those documents then, and obviously the UK needed or has always had that supply of machinery safety regulations on its statutory instrument. The same as France, Germany would have their own equivalent laws. Another example there, Simple Pressure Vessels Directive EU, reference there, 2014-29 EU, very similar terminology. Simple Pressure Vessels Safety Regulations 2016. I appreciate there's obviously difference in the terminology and years here, but that's the content, the go-to compliance information remains the same. The ATEX Directive 2014-34 EU, the equivalent UK, is what's called the Equipment and Protective Systems Intended for Use in Potentially Explosive Atmospheres Regulations 2016, which again is quite a detailed explanation there, but is equivalent in content. One of the things that I would mention on this slide is that under the EU side, we've got the reference to Machinery Directive, and under the UK side, we've got reference to regulations. And I'm not a political expert or but my understanding is from these areas is that a regulation is easier to change on the statutory books for a member state than a directive is easier to change. That doesn't mean that the UK is going to take the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008 and rip it up and rewrite it. But it's a method or the reference that's given to these legal documents. And it's quite possible that when the EU Machinery Directive is redrafted, it may be formed into a regulation. So hopefully that gives us some comparisons of headline information. Because when we were talking a few moments ago about CE, one of the first things we talked about was the headline directives that we were going for. And these contain information such as the EHSRs, Essential Health and Safety Requirements. So we would be looking at those for undertaking our risk analysis of the product that we want to place on the market. So with this UK legislation for UKCA marking, we will be looking at these other documents here. And so they gives us some terminology there. If we could go on to the next slide, please, Kevin. As I mentioned at the beginning, we started off, looking at CE and then obviously where does UKCA come into this and align with it. One of the things that we need to be aware of, and obviously with managing compliance, is saying, right, okay, then. How can we manage our compliance as efficiently, as effective as possible for our business, integrate UKCA, ensure we've got everything covered there, and also maintain our CE compliance. So here is an example roadmap. So again, we will be looking at the full design aspects of the products, and we will be establishing which EU and equivalent UK legislation is applicable. So one of the areas that I find the most simple when we're looking at these types of things is flowcharts. The use of flowcharts for establishing where we are currently with CE, and then align and then putting a similar flowchart together for UKCA usually solves quite a number of complexities. Sometimes multiple flowcharts are needed because of various different elements. Machines may have transport elements, etc., that are covered under type approval. But that type of approach allows us then to say, okay, then starting off with EU directives, equivalent UKCA legislation, what's applicable. One of the other key things that we talked about before, we talked about the NANDO reference with regards to notified bodies. One of the first things we've got to establish is can we cover the compliance under self-assessment, or is a type approval element needed? So again, we referred back to our earlier discussions where us as a group of manufacturers are designing this piece of new equipment, and yes, we need to have some operator on there, and yes, we need some safety cab, etc. So that would be type approval, and we'd have to approach those bodies. So what's been happening is that for UKCA compliance, the UK government is requiring us to have type approval bodies who have a office registered in the UK. The same as the ensuring, obviously, CE compliance. CE compliance is requiring type approval bodies to be based in the EU. So we've got this headline information here where we've got some levels of equivalent. But there is one important strap line, which again, we need to be aware of. So we've already put one marker in the sand of saying, well, we need to remember that the UKCA is covering the England, Scotland, and Wales. The UK, or the application of this equivalent legislation, which was on the previous slide, is possible providing legislation remains equivalent in content. And again, as we are here in early November 2021, that legislation remains the same, and as far as we are aware, will remain the same going forward. But it's just one of those things that we need to monitor and manage as part of the compliance process. So when we talk about the next stage of compliance, we've got the directives or the regulations in place. We're then talking about these EU Harmonised Standards, and with the example referred to before was the guarding standard. That standard there, the BS-EN ISO 14120, means that it's an international standard that's been adopted by the Europeans, EN, and also been adopted by British Standards, BS-EN. So again, that standard is applicable for UKCA marking. UKCA couldn't use the word EU harmonised and therefore has applied the phrase UKCA designated standards. So the UK is listing its applicable standards, which are the same as those standards there for under EU harmonised standards. Again, when we're looking at compliance, as we've referred to before, there might not be specific standards which cover a specific design. But if we've got hydraulics on there, then we will be typically looking at an ISO 4413-2010 standard, which would give us the risk reduction requirements for all aspects of fluid power movement, hydraulic rams, pipes, accumulators, etc. If we had electric on there, then we could be looking at the BSEN 60204-1 standard, which again give us a wide range of applications, AC, DC voltages, and again fixed appliances, moving equipment, etc. So this is where we're saying, or this phrase that sometimes people or has been shared across industry. Well, UKCA is just the same as CE. Well, it's aligned with CE, but we need to be handling it as a separate process or aligned process, so that we ensure that the correct areas are covered, especially when it comes to type approval. So hopefully that's given us a clarification there of some of the areas of getting down to or achieving UKCA compliance. If you could take us on to the next slide, please, Kevin. When we talk about this whole area of compliance and documentation, the priority that legislative authorities are looking for is risk assessment. So what has been done as part of this overall process to manage exposure of operators, any people that are in the immediate area to risks, hazards, etc. So what we're looking for in our top left-hand box there is referring to the standards. We're looking for this risk reduction in hierarchical order, inherently safe design measures, which are effectively engineering controls to eliminate the hazard. So again, in our discussions with colleagues, etc., you could look at a mechanical transfer shaft as an existing form of power transmission replacement with hydraulic fluid power, which obviously takes away a number of elements of risk. There are a lot of other ranges within there, but all the time when we're applying that risk control, we're making sure it's effective across the life cycle of the machine. Where we can't necessarily eliminate the risk, we're putting in further control measures, such as guarding, such as reducing exposure to hazardous materials without relying on PPE. What we've got to remember is our last line of defence is the PPE and reference to the operator's manual and safety decals, etc., because that's relying on a human interaction, which hopefully with trained operators we should have in place. But it's just one of the areas that as a manufacturer we haven't always got as much control over. So again, that whole process, and as manufacturers you'll be aware of the amount of time and effort put into testing, etc. One of the other very important things is obviously collating this third-party information, components and specifications, and obviously we need to be looking to say, well, okay, then verifying that our manufacturers are applying the UKCA also where appropriate as part of the supply chain. We're then compiling this technical file in accordance with the legislative requirements. And as an example, I refer to the EU Machinery Directive in this example. Annex 7 gives quite a detailed list of what's needed in there. And essentially, this risk assessment is a key element. There's various formats which we can be using, but effectively, what we're looking to demonstrate is how the control measures have reduced that risk to the operators, etc. The technical file could include a lot of test information, that could include a lot of third-party test information that's been provided. It can include prototype testing. It can include emails from manufacturers and suppliers, etc. A whole host of that information that's used. And this is again, okay, I understand that there's a reference to the CE, but the UKCA is also seeking this or requiring this technical file to be documented. It's a live working document, and it's available there to be referenced as part of product development process. So as product design is updated and reviewed, the technical file can be referred to and says, well, hang on a minute, 2 or 3 years ago when we were doing testing, we looked at so-and-so, there wasn't at that time any components available, but because of advancements in state of the art, there are now some improved components which we can use and look at. The other key part, obviously, with the technical file is that standards are reviewed. So the example before with the 14120 2015 is an updated standard from one from a few years previously. And again, as standards are updated, it's an opportunity then to be able to look at the technical file and say, well, hang on a minute, are we in compliance? What has changed within the standard? And are we? Do we need to do anything to the design to ensure that we're covered? And as standards are developed and updated, what they are starting to do is put more information in documents, which explains what has changed from the previous copy, which is obviously most helpful, especially when you've got quite a detailed document. Bringing us on to and maintaining the theme of the UKCA, this is where there is one of the differences. We need to be able to draft what we call the UKCA Declaration of Conformity, listing the UK designated standards. And this document is signed by a UK-based representative. So at the moment, what has happened within the UK is businesses who are shipping to Europe have had to seek an EU authorised representative that's based in the EU to sign off their CE declaration. And what will be required is for UKCA is a UK based person or UK based body, should I say, to sign this off. And that person could be based in Northern Ireland. So again, there's a little bit of analogy there that we need to understand, and this is when we're talking about these flow charts and almost flow charts, maps of the EU and of the UK, and almost the labels on there of where UKCA is applied and where EU is applied. So these documents would be obviously very similar to the EU Declaration of Conformity. Some of the designated standards would be the same detail as would be on the EU declaration, but this is a separate document to go into the operator's manual or be supplied with the product. If you could take us on to the next slide, please, Kevin. So machinery compliance, and again, this is just giving us a little bit more information, or a little bit detail, should we say. The EU Machinery Directive recognises the status of what's called partly completed machinery. Machinery comes in many different forms, combinations, And this is termed as machine that cannot perform a function until it is integrated into another assembly to form a complete machine. Sometimes, as I say, the definitions here, an example would be maybe a conveyor system. So if we put a conveyor system in the middle of the workshop or out in the middle of the yard and says, can this perform a function on its own? Quite clearly it can't, or unlikely it's going to be able to perform a function unless it's got a feeding system and a discharge system which is safely connected into it. And once we've got those things in place and we've got electrical connections and we've got all the safety elements in place, we've got an overall assembly of machines. So what the EU allows us for is this, what's called partly completed machinery with a declaration of incorporation, where the CE mark is not applied to the serial plate or accompanying documentation. The important thing to note is the risk assessment procedure for partly completed machinery is exactly the same as for complete machinery. So if there's ever any challenges there of what is correctly defined as partly completed machinery and somebody said it's not CE marked, well, technically it's CE compliant under a declaration of incorporation because it's partly completed machinery. So the risk assessment that has been undertaken is the same as would be for the complete assembly when it's put into place. And what the UKCA is applying the same principles. So applying a UKCA declaration of incorporation, which is signed off by a nominated representative within the UK, but do not apply the UKCA mark to the serial plate or supporting documentation. And again, we can all hark back to our younger years, and one of the examples I use here is the Lego. So somebody goes and buys the Lego fire station, somebody else buys the Lego police station, hospital, etc. But effectively, they've all got those individual elements. They all need to be put together on one big Lego board and a few Lego blocks put together to join it all together. A simple analogy, but it's a good example reference. So as we're going through UKCA and trying to understand where products fit in, this is another example. Just as a reference point, the Machinery Directive and the UK Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations are the only legislative documents which have this partly completed element in there. So everything else would be classed as fully CE compliant if it was under possibly maybe EMC compliance or one of those other areas. So again, this is just a confirmation of requirements for machinery compliance. If you could take us on to the next slide, please. Timings. First of all, the UKCA guidance has requested that products which are requiring type approval have the UKCA mark applied as of now. So hopefully businesses that are in this area are already aware of these things, and this has been in place for a short while already. You'll also may be aware of the fact that the UK has pushed back the requirement for mandatory UKCA marking from January 2022 back to January 2023. And that was obviously a range of discussions among stakeholders and businesses, etc. Up until then, obviously, the UK is accepting existing CE compliance as it has been doing throughout the remainder of 2021. The terminology that is on the UK government website is UKCA marking is required to be affixed to a label attached to the product. That can have many different connotations. The recommendation from today's briefing is that businesses are ready to go with the full UKCA compliance from late 2022, which would cover the requirements for the UKCA logo on the serial plate and the declaration of conformity incorporation in the manual. So obviously the links to the government websites are available, and I'm sure Kevin will provide those as well, but those provide information where the UKCA logo can be uploaded, sent off to the serial plate printers, and can be included on documentation. Both a UKCA mark and a CE mark can be applied to a serial plate. So the UK and EU will allow each other's compliance mark, but won't accept it as a form of compliance. So again, if we're thinking about this product manufacturer, which as part of our group discussions we've designed and built, and we think, well, okay, then where are we going to sell it? Well, we don't quite know yet. We don't know whether we're going to sell it on the UK market, England, Scotland, Wales, or into Northern Ireland, or it might be sold into the UK and then sold again and off into Northern Ireland, then into Southern Ireland and back into the EU again. So we have the opportunity there to put both UKCA and CE marks on there. And as an example, you may be familiar with compliance that you look at in maybe household items, where you'll see maybe a UL mark on there, where the US have put a UL mark on there, a CE mark on there, and they're also going to UKCA mark it. So the EU accept they recognise the UL form, UL compliance on there, but won't accept it as a form of compliance. But as a reminder there, the UKCA and CE declarations of conformity or incorporation must remain as separate documentations and can't be combined into one document. So it's keeping those two separate and ensuring the signatures are from the very required locations. Okay, Kevin, if you could just move us on, please. Second-hand machinery, again, appreciate that these questions have been raised, and obviously manufacturers are very much looking at the residual value of their equipment. The legislation and guidance very much focuses on where we are with the introduction of the UKCA mark from the 1st of January 2023. The interpretation is that machinery that's built before then can be resold onto the UK market with the original CE marking. The recommendation is and should manufacturers obviously selling into both markets, that manufacturers apply both the UKCA and CE marks to their new equipment, and that obviously maximizes the potential resale value for both markets. There's always a caveat here with these types of things, and we haven't got a crystal ball, and we don't know exactly where the UK legislation or EU legislation will go. But as we've got the footnote there, both the EU and UK legislation needs to remain aligned. We haven't had any formal information yet with regards to the sales of used machinery. Obviously, we're very much aware that the EU will retain their requirement for CE compliance for the sales of second-hand machinery. So that applying that approach with both the CE mark and the UKCA mark on there ensures that the product can have a free flow across the markets throughout its life cycle. Okay, then Kevin, if you could move us on. UK NI mark. Again, as a background to the UKCA mark, so we've already talked about the fact of we've got this because of the trade agreements and this this analogy of, or this fitment for Northern Ireland with retaining CE. the UK NI mark doesn't represent any means of compliance for machinery under self-certification. It's slightly unfortunate that it's exactly the same kind of format, etc., and it flows very easily in the thought process initially of saying, right, okay, then hang on a minute, we know that, oh, hang on a minute, Northern Ireland's slightly separate. Yeah, well, you know, should this be UK NI mark? It was specifically established for type approval requirements where UK-based bodies are placing goods on the Northern Irish market, and it's not linked to self-certification for machinery for UKCA. So again, if we're looking at these headline information to take from today, if we're talking about CE or UKCA compliance, self-certification, we're also looking at Northern Ireland, then we're thinking, right, okay, then we need to be looking at our CE for Northern Ireland, our UKCA for the UK market, etc. The link there at the bottom gives us more information on where we need the UK NI mark. So effectively, park that separately, and it's only a go-to if it's a specific type approval requirement. And hopefully that assessment via type approval bodies would establish whether UK NI was applicable. And just move us on, please, Kevin. So in summary, the UKCA mark is a mandatory requirement for placing products on the market from the 1st of January 2023. It was delayed from January 2022. We can apply this requirement now, or we can put it in place now. We can start UKCA marking. And as you're probably aware, if some of your businesses may already be in a position where UKCA marking, you may be seeing products already out there. For UKCA, we're covering England, Scotland and Wales, and Northern Ireland retains the CE marking requirement. UKCA requires a technical file to be drafted with risk assessments, replicating CE documentation. Obviously, if we've got some, as I say, type approval bodies, then we need to make sure that they've got this UK base. And as you'll probably be aware, a lot of companies are making sure that they're aligned with type approval bodies, both in the EU and in the UK. The application, or this synergy between the CE and the UK, we need to keep monitoring the alignment of the legislation and ensuring that it remains consistent. And I'm sure that there are many manufacturers and trade bodies who are lobbying the various sectors to ensure that that remains the case. Again, just reiterating, type approval bodies for UKCA must have the UK-based office, and obviously as part of your combined CE and UKCA compliance, then you'll be looking at bodies that have representation in both areas. The UK NI mark is not linked to the UKCA and has that specific requirement for type approval into Northern Ireland. So hopefully a summary there of the key points. Compliance is can be a complex area, and appreciate we've had a summary overview today. So thank you very much. A lot of information there. Appreciate there's been some questions already, but I'll hand you back to your host, Kevin.
Thanks, Mike. Great overview UKCA there for our clients. Some useful insights and tips along the way. As you did say, a number of questions are coming in from the audience as we speak. Please pop in any questions you do have along the toolbar on the bottom, and we'll hope to get to them before the end of our presentation here today. I think a good place to start is a question. I'll just pause my screen. A good place to start is around that, we'd say, UK-based representative piece. And ahead of today's webinar, a number of questions came in around that. Could you kind of delve a bit more into what is required for Irish companies in terms of a UK-based representative, and what our companies with a more limited UK presence can do on that front?
So a UK UKCA authorised representative is effectively a nominated contact within the UK that the UK legislative authorities can approach should they wish to find out more information about the compliance status of the product that's been placed in the UK. So again, it's mirroring that requirement in EU authorised representative, and that work schedule and what's required of them can be it can be extensive, or it can be summarised in a more succinct area. So to one extent, it could be full assessment of compliance, full risk assessments, drafting of the technical file, signing off of the documentation, the documentation, etc. On the other hand, it could be just the signing off of the documentation, i.e. the UKCA document, as a nominated contact, should we say, within the UK, who can then refer back to the manufacturer should there be any queries. So again, this headline information, with regards to what that contact does there, then it can vary. So sometimes some people use a separate EU or UKCA authorised representative. People have used dealers and distributors before who have kindly taken on those roles. And it's how that relationship is formed. Obviously, the technical file can be held, or the technical file needs to be accessible by the UKCA representative so that they can pass it on to the legislative body should they need.
Okay, just a question coming in off the back of that point from John. John is wondering just around, we'd say, does this apply to both machinery or equipment that requires type approval and self-certification? And his question is mainly, if I can self-certify my product, do I still need a UK representative to sign off on my UKCA compliance?
UKCA documentation. So the manufacturer can go through the risk assessment, but it is that person who's based in the UK who needs to provide a signature on there. So we're still needing a signature on there, but the manufacturer can still go through the process of self-certifying themselves. Self-certifying, so I said, going through that process of applying the harmonised standards and drafting the risk assessment.
And another follow-up question coming off that this person, could a distributor fill this role? Is there options to outsource this role and potentially pay a fee for it?
Yes. There is that option there, and there are obviously, as in the EU, businesses have set themselves up as authorised representatives, and businesses in the UK will do the same, and will provide a range of services within those areas we've discussed, from a compliance assessment, signatures, etc.
Great. And yeah, just to kind of move on to another area of discussion and back to the type approval piece. We have a question in from Terry around trail agricultural equipment, and does that need type approval? Probably more general question to run with is, what products need type approval, what don't, and how do you define, we'd say, whether your product needs that type approval?
Right. Okay. Then, well, it's a complex answer to a complex question to answer, should I say, without an example. But if we say we look at the various directives, so the machinery directive and UK supply of machinery safety regulations covers the machine up until the point that it joins the transport elements. It doesn't cover the actual road running elements. So within the UK, we have what's called the UK construction and road use regulations. I understand in Southern Ireland, again, there'll be some of its own road legislation there. So effectively, the road area of compliance would be dictated by what the national government is saying. So if as an example, the national UK government says we apply the construction and use regulations, and That is done on a self-certification basis with elements of type approval, or sorry, including braking assemblies, which a braking assembly would have to be type approval anyway. We can't go out and do self-assessment on a braking assembly. So we'd be going back to this this framework or this flow chart of almost putting our machine at the top, breaking it down in elements as we go down through there, and saying, right, okay, then what markets are we supplying it into? What do we know that the self-certification covers us for? And saying, right, okay, then yes, we know it covers the machine elements. No, it doesn't cover the transport elements. What does cover the transport elements? Is that a self-certification under a different set of road legislation, or are we looking for type approval for markets, or are certain member states within the EU seeking type approval as a mandatory requirement? So it is very much this, very much you take the machine, you take it out in the yard, and you take it to pieces and lay it all out, theoretically. And then you say, right, where are we with the compliance? What can we fit into our self-certification box, and what's left out in the yard there? And then where do we need to go next? And you know, and what markets are we looking for, etc. So I appreciate that isn't a definitive answer, but it's going back to this logic. You're all the time you're all the time ensuring that you're reducing the unknowns. We're reducing those grey areas and saying, yes, we know that this type of or this road legislation will cover this certain area. But then again, you've got, as I say, we know that we've got people producing machines that could go to Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, and all of a sudden then, well, hang on a minute, what happens if it goes to France, Belgium, etc. So you really do need to get these flow charts, you know, put together and establishing, you know, where we sit.
Yeah, perfect. And just we did touch on the final piece and around that is around parts and how parts play into this. Should our clients be seeking out parts that are UKCA approved? What would be your advice around our OEMs on the call who are dealing with parts providers at this point?
The headline information coming from, when you're looking at the UK government website, it starts with some, you know, simple, straightforward guidance. If it was CE marked under self-certification before, it needs to be UKCA approved, obviously under the relevant designated standards. So we would be seeking compliance from those third-party manufacturers. We're in this situation where we're obviously aiming towards this December 2022 for compliance. Manufacturers will be bringing in all these components and bringing them together, and will obviously be wanting to make sure that they've either got UKCA compliance or it's in process. It's in process, and that when they are declaring compliance for their complete machine on the market, then they've got the UKCA components. One of the key things to remember, of course, is if you've got spare parts. So you're saying, right, hang on a minute, yes, oh well, that company there is going to get UKCA compliance, but they haven't got it yet. But remembering that component might need to be put onto the market as a spare part for the end user to source, when it's after wear and tear, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. And we'd say, moving on to a point that I think is the kind of cornerstone of the whole presentation and from the background, is around the alignment of UKCA and CE and the kind of game of chicken at play there between the two bodies. What would you view as the likelihood of divergence there? Because obviously that would throw a spanner in the works for the whole process.
That causes some significant concerns, and I think we've just got to remember where we are. We're 12 months down the line from the UK independence from the EU. It was first of all getting these things into place. The UKCA wanted it in place for January 2022. That's now been pushed back. Certainly, you've heard my comments today about obviously seeking this continual alignment, and I would envisage that it would need to remain consistent throughout, because look at how many different components, how many different products we've got going across different borders as part of the process. So I'm not a politician, Kevin. So but I would, if I was encouraging them, should I say? And obviously, the other thing we've got to remember is that when these standards are drafted, then they're drafted at various international levels. So we've now got a range of international standards that are available. Okay, then that doesn't necessarily mean that international directives are the same, but we're obviously going to want to be applying this same harmonized standard for products, and that BSE and ISO 14120 is a global standard.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, I think that's it exactly. There's a question in here, and I'm conscious it might be outside of your area a small bit, Mike, but we're happy if you'd like to pass it on. We can follow up after. But there's a question here from one of our clients on the heating side, and it's a case of a boiler being part of a wider network of equipment, or a system as he calls it here. Does that need to be UKCA marked, as it is unable to operate without all the other components, and how that works? Have you an idea into that?
Well, as or alluding back to the presentation from the description, then we've got this option to use, which is this appropriate form of compliance, the Declaration of Incorporation. So we're going through the risk assessments, the same level of risk assessments and compliance that we would do for full machinery, but we're placing it on the market as partly completed machinery. We would still need an operator's manual, and the operator's manual includes in there what's called the residual hazards. So when the end user takes the boiler assembly and integrates it, they would say, well, okay, then we've got pressure coming off this boiler at X amount of bar. We've got an assembly of pipes that have been welded to a certain standard, etc. We need to make sure that's consistent throughout. And then what would happen is they would take the Declaration of Incorporation, they would effectively put it into an overall manual for the complete assembly, and they would commission the heating system as a whole. So it would be effectively you almost the handing the baton on for the manufacturers is saying, we've done as much as we can, and we've provided as much information to the end user on installing this product and making it safe. So that's an example there.
Perfect. I hope that provided a bit of clarity for you there, Neil. Last question, conscious of time, and thanks for everyone for jumping on and staying with us this long. The last question I kind of have is for clients, conscious that a lot of our clients on today's call, based on the feedback, are at a very early stage when it comes to UKCA. And can you give us an idea of a timeline, be it for an OEM or an equipment provider on our call, from starting the process of UKCA compliance to the end point? Can you give an idea of how long that would take? And we'd say, yeah, pretty much the timelines on that would be great.
Yeah, very good question. From experience and if you looked at a simple mechanical element that was incorporated, maybe a couple of power sources, hydraulics and mechanical transmission, probably take about 3 months. And that would be a combination of going through the process. And this would be, part of the existing design team. But alongside, I want to say alongside the day job, but it would need some time allocated to it. So certainly 3 months. For an area where you need type approval, you would be looking at probably 9 to 12 months, and possibly even longer if there's been delays with or being able to establish the type approval bodies, etc., etc. So certainly, you know, that 3 months upwards is a usual type of timescale.
Yeah, perfect. I'm conscious more questions are coming in, and Mike has kindly offered to follow up an email with any further questions that have come in. So happy to follow up on those following today's presentation, just to share my details with you. So you can see my email there. Happy to address any questions over email and link Mike in on that. Or if you have any questions on any other topics, just please feel free to get in touch. Thanks again, Mike, for your contribution today. I hope that provided a good overview for our clients and some great tips there on, we'd say, next steps that our clients can get involved in. And I'd like to thank everyone for jumping on today's call. We've had great engagement with this webinar, and conscious that UK machinery standards mightn't be the first choice for your morning coffee on a Tuesday, but we're delighted that you were able to join, and happy to support you in this. As I said earlier, we will be sharing the slides from today's webinar along with the recording of today's presentation with clients following the webinar. If you have any further questions, please drop me an email, and you can follow our Enterprise Ireland Twitter and LinkedIn account for more webinars, events, market intelligence coming from our team. Finally, thanks everyone for attending, and once more, thanks again to you, Mike, for jumping on. Hope everyone has a great day, and speak to you soon.
Thanks very much.